Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, the Sugar Show, baby. Is it here to stay? Weili versus Jonan. Weili versus Suarez. Which one sounds better? Ian Machado Garry, just how big of a deal is he? All this and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Gorgeous George. And with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, the MMA media titan is back. Mike Bond checking in from Toronto. Nolan King is with us. He was Octagon side for UFC 292 and goes from MMA Junkie Radios in the house. He rounds out the panel. Kamikaze is holding down the ones and twos. Let's get to it. We start at the top with some UFC 292 main event talk. Sean O'Malley defeated Aljamain Sterling to capture the UFC bantamweight title, as you all probably know by now. Dana White already said Sean O'Malley's a superstar, but he's his promoter. I want to know, what do you guys expect from his title reign? What kind of a ride are we in for, fellas? Is he a superstar in your eyes? Mike, we go to you for this first take.
Ooh, a superstar? I don't know if I put him right there just yet, but he's definitely a star within like the UFC context, right? Like he already feels like one of the biggest guys on the roster, and that he's just got that additional layer that pretty much everyone is craving for and chasing. But is he a crossover star yet? Has he reached that, Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey level, things like that? I think we need a slower roll on that a little bit, but this is just the start in theory, right? Like he's still in his 20s. He just won the belt. He's got all the time in the world. This is the proper step, but you have to see what happens from here. But it's going to be challenging, right? Like all the other things are going in his direction, but he's got to keep winning. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And in this bantamweight division that is ridiculously stacked, so much talent from top to bottom, no easy layup fights coming his way anytime soon. That's what's going to make the difference. If he can put together a reign and some defenses, then everything changes. He's going to have the world at his fingertips. He's going to be able to, do whatever he wants, call his shots, things like that. But can't understate how difficult that's going to be. This division is absolutely insane. Everyone is going to know what it's going to mean for their career to beat Sean O'Malley, to be the one to take that belt away from him. And it's going to be a huge deal for them. So anytime he gets in there, you're going to have people coming for his head, people knowing what a victory over him will be. So it's going to be tough for him to stay on top. But if he can do it, yes, he is poised for superstar status.
All right. Nolan, you were there in Boston. You're from Boston. And do you agree with Mike? I mean, the way the picture was being painted was that there was pink everywhere, I guess Sugar Show merch everywhere. So what's maybe one level below superstar if you don't think he's a superstar? Huge star? What do you think?
Yeah, I think he could be a pretty big star. It's kind of hard to place him because I think Mike's right. I think like the Conor McGregor Rousey level is, I don't want to say unobtainable for people, but I just don't even think it's something when somebody comes into to their own and kind of breaks through. It's almost impossible to see them getting that far, but I think he's kind of like whatever the step is before that, right? Like even looking at the roster right now, I mean, you obviously got John Jones, years of name recognition and him being the GOAT. People are very interested in John. But outside of that, I mean, I think Sean kind of has the potential here to kind of take that number 2 slot. I mean, I think Israel Adesanya is globally more popular than people give him credit for. I mean, we see the numbers on these people and we kind of understand that. But Sean O'Malley, it just felt like an iconic moment on Saturday. It was one of those times that we talk about where maybe things didn't necessarily make sense on paper for him to win coming into this fight in the eyes of a lot of people. But it was just the tale that was meant to be written, man. He stepped up. He had kind of the perfect build up to the UFC championship, to be honest with you. I know it was under fire. He didn't do the right things merit-wise to get in there. He hadn't earned it. He hadn't had a big win, whatever. But like at the end of the day, could the UFC had a better build up for him? Could they have done a better job? Like, think about how many people criticized him and got invested in his story through their doubt of him. I mean, we saw this with Conor McGregor as well. He never fought a wrestler, never fought anybody good. He fought Chad Mendes, who was hurt, and there was always that doubt. And that doubt is what kind of kept people to come back and back and back. And I mean, there's still doubt. The fact that he hasn't fought pretty much anyone on the UFC roster right now, O'Malley could fight. There's no fights that have been eliminated. Even the fights that he fought guys in the top 10, Pedro Munoz and Chito Vera, he lost to Vera, and the fight against Munoz was a no contest. So outside of even Jan and Sterling rematches or something that people could down the line, be interested in for different reasons. So I think you can criticize the process, but at the end of the day, it all worked out for the UFC, and they do have a very big bantamweight star in their hand.
Cool. All right. How about you, Goes? What are your thoughts on the possible potential, maybe superstardom of Sean O'Malley? Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself as well.
Well, I think you and I have done this plenty of times on MMA Junkie Radio. We have to define that star ranking, right? I feel like there's a star, there's a superstar, and then there's a mega star. I think a mega star is someone like a Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey, as was talked about before. I have Sean O'Malley in that superstar area, right? We've seen it before. The guy walks into a room and it just lights up, man. People love this guy. And how many times does this guy have to get a win before we stop calling them upsets, right? It's just one after another. I think we have to give him his respect at this point. The UFC, they've lost some pretty big stars along the way in the last couple of years, but this emergence of these new fighters, these new cats that are kind of taking these big steps forward, it's really making the future look really bright for guys like Sean O'Malley for the UFC. In the cage, I mean, dude, he performed, man. I mean, the worst thing you could do is give that guy any space, and that's what he got. The second you give him space is when he starts to feel comfortable and he really lets it out. And he did that on Aljamain Sterling. And Aljamain Sterling, I mean, that's a tough guy. It's a guy that we were all kind of calling the GOAT going into this fight. So for him to be able to accomplish that at an early age like this, I think it's pretty big for himself. It's big for the UFC. But as Mike said, and Nolan said as well, like, it's going to be tough to hold that. And it's nothing against Sean O'Malley. It's just kind of par for the course. Anybody that were to take that strap, I really feel like in the next year and a half, we're going to appreciate just how good Aljamain Sterling was because of what we're going to see at the top of that division, because it's killer after killer. And to be able to fight through all that, I don't know if anybody else can do something like that. So this reign, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's going to be really tough. And they're already, in the chat, Paul M., he makes a good point. He says, Patchy #1. Hey, I'm not saying that's too crazy. If you look at Patchy Mix and what he's been able to do and the type of skill set he has, if you matched him up with Sean O'Malley, that'd be a hell of a fight too. So I don't know, man. This division is absolutely nuts across the board in mixed martial arts.
Yeah, everybody thinks Patchy backpacking, but that last title that he won was that wicked knee that he threw at him. You like that, Nolan? Wicked? Did I say it right?
You got it. Nailed it.
All right. Just trying to fit in here to keep with the theme. Yes, like Ghost said, the comments. I'm going to get to some of them. Bring them. Questions, comments. The better they are, the more likely you are to get on here. Okay, here's Alexander Wayne. He says he said he was going to get the finish when Aljo rushes in. Yep. Sniped him, man. He leaned back and boom, countered really, really nicely. Alan says that is what Connor also said. Also, give me a little more context there about what you're talking. But thank you for chiming in, Alan. Pro Fights Info. Happy Monday morning, gents. Fun fight of fights this past weekend. Yes, I would agree with that one. All right, so just a couple follow-ups here because this is a huge topic with Sean O'Malley there. A lot of people have been blowing me up as well. He's talking about his first title defense being against Chito Vera, the guy he didn't lose to, but really did. But is it too early to call the shots here, guys? Now, remember, the more title defenses you have, look at what Izzy's kind of been doing. Izzy has a little bit more weight to throw around. He partners up more with the UFC's big brass and says, this is what I think we should do or whatever. Others are just told to show up and defend. But O'Malley does seem to have some stock, like we just talked about. Megastar, superstar, huge star. I don't know. Dvalishvili was there. Sandhagen was there. Both of them just had recent surgeries. Dvalishvili's a little bit ahead, I think, on his timeline. You saw him kind of grappling with his partner there, Aljamain, throughout fight week, light partnering, but still. And Aljo is now technically out of the way. However, Aljo wants an immediate rematch. So unpack this for me, Mike. We go back to you.
Yeah, I think it's more of like a timing thing, right? I think you laid it out pretty well there. I don't know if it's necessarily like calling the shot more so than being logical and what makes sense right now. You lay it out there, like it's definitely not going to be Corey Sandhagen. And it all depends too, right? Like does Sean O'Malley get his wish of wanting to fight in December at UFC 296 in Las Vegas? He made it pretty clear all the lead up that that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be active, get right back in there. But you see this post he put out last night with like all the reactions to the knockout and the fallout. And he said not only like this muscle injury and like his ribs that he had, he seemingly had like a knee injury, some other stuff going on. So like, how healthy is he really? We see this all the time. Champions, people who become champion for the first time, say one thing about what they want out of their title reign leading up. And when they win that belt, it's suddenly like, well, there's no more perfect time to get this surgery that I've been pushing off for a long time. And they're maybe out like 6 months, a year. This happens pretty frequently, honestly. And I don't blame them, right? You put in all the work, you take the risks leading up to that championship moment. And then on the back end of it, that's when you have the leverage and the power to make a move like that. So we'll see what he ends up doing. But if he wants a quick turnaround, if he wants December, it's got to be Chito Vera. I mean, this is a perfect storyline for the UFC. You can't draw it up any better. Sean O'Malley can go in there in his first title defense, avenge his only loss. That would be like huge stuff. It reminds me of kind of the older school, like Chuck Liddell's title reign, when they were trying to just cross off all his losses by bringing in like Jeremy Horn and, you know, doing the Babalu fights and things like that. Because it's great. I mean, if you can say Sean O'Malley will claim he's undefeated, but if he's able to avenge that loss, there would be much more merit behind it. And people love Chito Vera. You can sell that fight. It all makes sense to me right now. If everyone was healthy, absolutely it should be Merab Dvalishvili first, Corey Sandhagen second, but we talk about this like every single week when we're trying to spin things forward. It's all about timing. It's all about who's healthy, who's not, all that stuff. And it seems right now this is a pretty perfect fight, and I think it's a great opportunity. I'd be disappointed if the UFC didn't pounce on it, because you never know. Chito could go in there and lose his next fight to someone else, and then it just doesn't line up. Him winning that fight against Pedro Munoz, it was perfect. I hope they pulled the trigger on this.
Yeah, you're right. He did say he did not grapple for 6 weeks before this fight. That was incredible to hear. All right, Nolan, your thoughts on this? It's a lot to unpack in this division. There are a lot of killers, a lot of possibilities. And again, it seems to me when you reach about the third title defense, you are kind of in that, you know, area where you can maybe request the rematch. It all depends. But as Goes has often said a long time, he just doesn't seem like one of the darlings for the UFC's big brass either. Like, maybe, I don't know if he's difficult or for whatever reason they just haven't taken to him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like Mike said, I mean, Merab, in a merit-based world where everybody was healthy, that would be a no-brainer. I mean, you look at the body of work he's done without having a title shot, that's the guy that you should match it up. But I'm not really sure. I'm kind of getting mixed messages from Merab in general about how his hand is. Like in the interview I did, you know, I think he's a guy that, like, if his leg was falling off, he would take a fight. So it's kind of hard to gauge, like, is he actually better? Is it getting better? You know, it's still, he showed me his hand and it still looked visibly like it had some issues going on, swelling, bruising. Granted, this fight would be, you know, 4 months away. So just to me, I think at this point in time, if there's any question marks, I'm sure that the UFC would like to go in the direction of Chito Vera, just because I think that's just like the star builder fight for O'Malley. It's, you know, it's a good fight. It's something that, you know, he won on Saturday. It's kind of aligned that way. They have history. You got the, you know, Chito's obviously very popular in Latin America, so you can bring that aspect into it. There's a lot that can go on, and essentially they'd end up with an extra title fight that perhaps they didn't expect to have this year. And if you look at the end of this year, It's going to be stacked. I mean, 294, 295, 296. I think we're in for a really solid streak of pay-per-views right there. So this would just be essentially an added bonus. But in terms of Aljamain Sterling in a rematch, like you just mentioned, I think as much as, again, I think in other divisions, and you might see the champion get kind of the benefit of the doubt there, but a second round knockout, I think, will maybe deter the UFC from turning that one around. But it's a fight that's there. You know, I don't think Aljo, if it's time, if he just has to wait out for his moment, or if he has to fight again, I don't think, you know, he's one fight away from being able to really claim that he's earned it again. So, by the way, he handled the loss great. I think out of all the champions I've ever seen lose their belt, I would tell future champions to look at Aljamain Sterling and the way he's carried himself, not hiding from it, accepting it, giving honest answers, refusing to use any excuses. So shout out to him for that. But I think despite that, he'll have to do something before the UFC just, you know, kind of rebooks that one.
Yeah, and Conor McHater, which is what I call him on fight nights, although he was Conor McGregor this weekend, he informed us he won't be fighting in December. So you're right; it does look like they need somebody. Goes, we were saying, Chito Vera, it's right there for the taking. Get the finish, say something cool on the mic, and back the champion into a corner. Whoever, we didn't know who it would be at that time, but he probably got the best endorsement possible, and that's from the champion now, the guy that holds the belt, who wants to fight him. So decision finish, it doesn't matter. He wants Chito Vera. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of the performance that he needed, right, to be able to do this because Dvalishvili is the guy that deserves it. Now, as Nolan said, we just don't really know. Like we see him around town, he's kind of still got that brace on his arm. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that locker room and find out what the conversation between Aljo and Dvalishvili was like, right? Because he's been the ultimate team player. He's been waiting for his buddy to do his thing, but now he's kind of backtracking a little bit on that, and I understand why. And he was very forthcoming, very truthful in his answer. But that creates a very difficult situation for those two. So I'd like to see how that plays out. But if you're the UFC, all those cards that are on the table, you just don't want to miss out on this fight. And I think you have enough of an argument with injuries and what's going on that you could probably make it and people aren't going to really throw rankings in your face or anything like that. I think we're all just going to kind of understand. And it's a fight that I think a lot of us will be interested in.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to figure out how Aljo and Marab navigate this. I think I don't know, man. To not grapple for 6 weeks and the other injuries that Mike listed that he heard about, wow, that might be a lot by December. But he's young, and young cats recover quickly. All right, we can always circle back to this. There is one question that came in, and any one of you that wants to take it, just jump in. Kyle Lane says, "Do you think Tim Welch is an underrated coach?" Who wants that one?
I think so. It's a name that really probably doesn't get thrown around with some of the top coaches. I think what ends up happening, guys, is you have these big camps, right? And I don't know that the head coach is really directly involved with every single fighter. Here in this situation, Tim Welch is the guy that I think is really, really just embedded in his game. So yeah, you have to give him props. I mean, look what he's been able to do with this fighter. It's pretty tremendous. So I think underrated. Yeah, I think he deserves more respect.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll move on here. Obviously we had the co-main event, another title fight. Zhang Weili defeated Amanda Lemos. Fun fight to watch. I mean, it was one-sided, especially when you look at the scores. But Amanda had her moments, and she didn't give up when it looked like, to me, a lot of fighters do just do the turtle and say, that's it. It's a wrap, right? So now we have an awesome scenario here. Zhang Weili versus Yan Zhonan in China against a fellow countrywoman, or Tatiana Suarez, undefeated, comes back and wins at flyweight, comes back, to strawweight and wins there. I mean, which one do you guys prefer here? Nolan, how about you, man? You can obviously chime in on the fight itself and what's next.
Yeah, I mean, Weili looked great. I think again, once it's shown through again, her personality, her ability to kind of get people to adore her. She's done a great job of building herself. I love the English that she broke out different times this week. The Boston crowd was fully behind her, which was cool to see. As far as her next challenge, I mean, it's kind of a toss up in my brain. I know that's kind of wishy washy. So Ty goes to the runner, so to speak. I would lean with Yan Zhonan still. I think she was kind of first to this party. I also think if the UFC is going to go to China in December, is this the fight they want to put on there? They obviously poses some questions of like, would they put a title fight on, ESPN or ESPN Plus in the United States? But maybe it would just do such a big numbers over there that it wouldn't matter. Maybe they don't care if it goes on, at Chinese time and people here in the States watch it, overnight. So for me, that would be the fight, especially if the China location is in play, which is kind of what we're hearing for December. But either way, man, they can't go wrong. I mean, Tatiana Suarez is somebody that we've been watching for a long time. She's had that build. She's come back from a lot of adversity and has been looking great recently. So I wouldn't be mad either way. I just feel like we've kind of been aligning for the Zhao fight. So that's why I'm kind of siding with her.
All right, we got one for the Panda. How about you, Goes? Your thoughts here? Give me, your overall assessment of Zhang Weili, the fight, and then who do you think's next?
Man, the way Zhang Weili fought, I think she could fight them both in the same night. I mean, that was just a tremendous performance on her part, dude. Over 5 rounds, she kept the same pace. Do you guys know how insane that is? It's like if Usain Bolt entered a marathon and ran it at a sprint pace the whole time. You'd be like, well, dude, you got to slow down. She was not slowing down one bit. It absolutely blew my mind. Amanda Lemos is no joke. She's tough, man. And if you look at the fight, it was like she was in 5 consecutive car accidents. What she went through, what her body went through. I mean, Zhang Weili is no joke. I think no matter who you throw in front of her, it's going to be hard to dethrone her. But for me, right now, if you're a promoter, I think it's a dream to be able to promote a fight where you have that 0 on somebody's name, right? We don't have to go too far back to see a loss on Panda's record. But if you look at Tatiana Suarez, I mean, undefeated, you see kind of what she's battled in her life. I think right now this might be the right time. I think she presents a decent attack. If you look at some of the things that she does, which she's really well at doing in fights, I think maybe it could give Zhang Weili some problems. But I think right now Zhang Weili is just on a different level than all these girls. The good thing is Tatiana Suarez, she doesn't back down either. She'll give her a decent fight. But I think that might be where they're leaning towards right now. But I wouldn't hate it. If it went the other way, it makes sense as well.
All right. How about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on this potential matchup scenario that we have here with Tatiana Suarez, Yan Xiaonan, and of course, tell me what you thought of the fight on Saturday night.
Yeah, the fight was dominance. Obviously, that was a spectacular performance from the champion. Was never really in danger at all at any point there. I know some people thought the chokes were close and stuff, but it didn't really seem like Weili was close to tapping or anything in those moments. And then she just cruised her way all 5 rounds. So yeah, how could you not be impressed with what she did in there? A great way to start off her second title reign. And it seems like maybe she's poised to be the long-term champ here that she kind of failed to do in her first championship run. So we'll see, but there's some interesting challenges ahead for sure. I think if you can do that fight with Yan Xiaonan in China, that's just too hard to resist, right? Like you heard a reporter from China asked Dana White at the post-fight press conference or talk to him and be like, this was like a couple hours after the fight, being like, this already has more than 1 billion views in China, Zhang Weili's win. And it's not like this was a quick, 20-second viral knockout or something. This was a 25-minute fight. So for that to surpass 1 billion views already there, that is just crazy stuff. And to have, a China versus China title fight, extremely rare for the UFC, they would salivate over that. So if they can do it, if they can figure out the logistics of putting on a show in China right now in this climate, which I'm sure is a whole other can of worms and sorting out. But if they get that done, you got to do that. But if you're talking about from the most competitive standpoint, what is the most intriguing matchup to me? It's got to be Tatiana Suarez, right? Like she is the undefeated contender. She is the one you see Zhang Weili a lot more recently leaning on her grappling in these fights to take people down, to dominate them from top position. It's going to be tough to do that against Tatiana Suarez. She is an incredibly high-level wrestler. So for her to go in there and do that, maybe on the flip side of it, is pretty intriguing. So I think that is the most dangerous fight for Weili. And if we're sitting here as like are putting on our matchmaker caps, right? What is the point of matchmaking? It's trying to find someone who can dethrone the champion. And I think we pretty clearly see Tatiana Suarez as the most legitimate contender in that regard. So I'd definitely like to see that. I think that is the fight to make.
Can I ask you guys a question? I know cultures are all different, but as a fan, wouldn't you rather see a Chinese fighter fight an American and cheer for the Chinese fighter than to kind of split the fan base? Like if you have 2 Chinese fighters, like, I don't know, as a fan, I think I'd want to just cheer for one and have that crowd roaring, but I could be wrong. But I don't, to me as a fan, I think that would be the more fun situation.
It is interesting because I remember I asked Yan Xiaonan after she won in Newark a couple months ago, like, who would the Chinese people be rooting for if you fight Weili? And she basically said that the people in China don't like her. and that she's like not someone that they are a fan of. They like Weili way more than her and stuff, and she can't wait to prove everyone wrong. It was a pretty spicy quote from her, and I was like, damn, I definitely want to see this now. They obviously went in the direction of Lemos, maybe because they think that a China fight is possible later this year. So yeah, there is some tension there. I can't speak to the actual like Chinese fan, what they're thinking, if they would be torn or whatever. But I think from like our perspective over here, it's fine. It gets me interested regardless. But yeah, I can't say what the Chinese people think aside from the context that Yan Xiaonan gave us.
Both big fights, that's for sure. And hey, let me throw a bone to Amanda Lemos, man. I can't say enough about her heart. She just did not give up. Nolan, you were there, man. You know, obviously we know she's 36, but she proves she can hang with the best. She didn't win the title that night. Like Mike said, close on some chokes. So a really nice overhand right, fast and powerful. What do you think? Who do you think we could line her up against next? You know, or do you think maybe she's gonna close out her career anytime soon? Who knows? I mean, Joanna's already retired and she's younger.
Yeah, I again, she just deserves a lot of props. I think it was one of those performances that kind of elevates somebody's stock, even though they lost in dominant fashion. For her, it's kind of hard to say. She's only had a couple of losses in this division, so and she's not. I mean, visibly, like she doesn't necessarily look like moving up would do her much good. But at the same time, I think when we saw her on the scale on Friday, there was a lot of people in the room that thought that she didn't look particularly great, like that her cut maybe was rough, and she was kind of. When she was off to the side waiting for the scale, she didn't look well. So maybe she could test the waters up a weight class. But overall, maybe like if she wants to stick around, whoever of those two fighters we just discussed, Suarez and Xiaonan, who doesn't get the title shot, if they're not going to be just sitting out waiting, they don't have any sort of promises like that from the UFC, depending on the turnaround time and how hurt she is, maybe Lemos would take one of them. But I don't think it's time to like panic or anything. I think she proved herself on Saturday that she's a strong contender in that division. It's just that the champion's that damn good, man.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Chat room, George, just before they're clearly listening because the moment I mentioned China, I got a spam phone call from China mainland on here. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. They're listening to us, guys.
All right. You want to answer it live on air?
No, I definitely did not pick that one up. I just screenshot it. So there you
go. Okay. All right. Also, Facebook, I know you guys are new to the show. We're live every Monday here, usually noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. But while Dana White Contender Series is on, we are going on an hour earlier. And right after us, the Dana White Contender Series weigh-ins will begin. So we'll continue here with the third topic. So with Marlon Vera, a fellow bantamweight cruising to a decision, perhaps the next big pop on Saturday night, me observing from Las Vegas, is what I thought, belonged to Ian Machado Garry, who also went to a decision, but man, it was exciting. Both guys were, but I think Garry had a little more pop, like I said. He was just more destructive on his way to hearing the scores from the judges, and he was also top-notch on the mic. It's too soon now, but let's look ahead, and I'm going to give you guys all of 2024, January or December, whatever. But does Ian Machado Garry, become a champion in 2024? Goes, you're next.
Man, this dude has the makings of a superstar. Actually, he's got a lot of those tools at his disposal. He's got a great camp that's going to push him. The future does look really bright, but I think if this were a book and we were reading it, we'd still be in those really early chapters. There's so much more to read, right? So right now, I'm going to say we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Let's see how he reacts in certain situations, right? What happens when a wrestler puts him on his back? There's still so many questions. But what he does have to his advantage, I think, is in his division, if he plays his cards right, if he kind of takes this fight by fight, the guys at the top are a little bit older, right? And they're going to go through each other. And there's a lot of mileage on those bodies, a lot of training camps. If he can time this properly and take his time, I think by the time he does get there, he's going to be much better. And I think those fighters are going to start to maybe go on their decline a little bit. So that being said, if he were to become champion, it would have to be very late in 2024. But I think it's a little too soon.
All right, Mike, your thoughts? Was he clicking for you like you seem to be clicking for everyone else? And do you think in all of 2024 he can wear gold?
I'm going to sell the championship reign by 2024 just because it seems like by his own admission, he doesn't want it that quick, right? He's been pretty clear in laying out both pre-fight and post-fight that he has this 4 more fight plan until getting to the championship. So I don't know. I guess maybe it could be line up in theory for like very late 2024 if he fights, this December, early next year, mid next year, whatever, end of next year, then maybe we're there. But yeah, welterweight is just so difficult, man. Like, especially, if Colby Covington defeats Leon Edwards and wins that belt, if you think he's going to be clamoring to be an active champion and fight the likes of Ian Garry, I have a bit of a wake-up call for you, right? We know how Colby Covington rolls, the type of matchups that he likes to take. He's only going to want like the high-profile names. He's going to want ones that he thinks are big sellers for him. So I can't fathom he sees Ian Garry in that vein yet. If he gets a couple more wins and positions himself and talks some trash, he already, kind of lined up some stuff there at the media day saying that Leon Edwards is just going to destroy Colby Covington, all that stuff. But we don't know what's actually going to happen when they get in there. So welterweight is a real tough one to climb through, man. It's hard to get those title shots. The champions are historically not the most active in the world. So it's going to be tricky for him to get that by the end of 2024. But that aside, it does feel like he's trending that direction eventually in his career. He is very talented, man. I know he rubs some people the wrong way with the way he speaks and the comments he made and the whole, Neil Magny beef on how it got personal over like alleged child abuse and stuff. That was, I think rubbing some people the wrong way, whether you think he maybe took Magny's comments out of context a little bit or overblew them, however you may interpret it. It was a kind of a polarizing approach for him. So yeah, he is one of those guys that I think just people's thoughts on his personality and how he carries himself might prevent him a little bit from reaching that superstar status, just because it seems like there's a lot of critics and haters out there for him. But he does have, the country of Ireland behind him. He's got a lot of the positive check marks in terms of like being a guy who can separate himself from the group. So things are trending his direction. Not many guys are able to give Neil Magny the work like that over the course of 3 rounds. It was impressive. So Ian Garry is definitely clicking, and he is doing all the things you could want him to do out of like a prospect on the rise. And he seems very intelligent about his career, his approach, what he wants to do moving forward. So all the good signs are there. It's just, can he keep delivering, kind of in a similar context to what we said about Sean O'Malley earlier? Like, he can have all these things, but you got to keep winning the fights. And there is a lot of difficult fights ahead of him in the welterweight division.
Yeah, and in watching these highlights, man, we used to say ass kicking, but man, there was a lot of leg kicking going on. I think that's what the kids are going to say, like the next generation. Poor Chris Weidman, poor Neil Magny. All right, Nolan, clean this up for us. What do you think about 2024 Ian Garry? Where's gold? I know Stephen Thompson, by the way, has already said he's not interested, right? I think he was one of the 4, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Dana indicated after the fight. But I think, just like Mike said, the timeline, like a lot of things would have to go right. He would have to be very active. So I'm going to say not in 2024, 2025, perhaps we can have that conversation of it happening in there. But yeah, Ian Garry, I think 2024 could be a breakthrough year for him one way or another, right? The thing that would really propel, in my opinion, his star potential, or whatever you want to call it, his popularity, would be that card that I asked Dana about, going back to Dublin. I think having kind of an Ian Garry-centric card in that environment would give him that big star feel. He would be somebody that would be highlighted, that people would look at and watch that event and hear that ovation that we know that the fans in Ireland are capable of giving. I think the roof would blow off, at the start of the fight. If he went out there and won, it would be even louder and even crazier in there. Those fans haven't had UFC fights in quite some time now. So that would be a really smart play by the UFC. I think it was a really smart play by Garry to call out Stephen Thompson too, another striker. Save the grappling matchups for a little bit later. I know Gary's trying to improve at all facets of his game. And to be honest with you, I think even in his time in the UFC, we've seen him get a lot better. He was a great fighter on the regional scene. I was very excited about him. And then the first fights that he came into in the UFC, I was not necessarily thrilled. I thought he really underperformed. I know people were saying, oh, it's just a learning curve. He's just adjusting. He's fighting tougher guys now. But I was a little bit nervous there for his trajectory as somebody I had been very high on. And then he seemed to turn this corner, and we've seen him take 2 big steps, I think, with his last 2 fights. The Wonder Boy fight is, in my opinion, is the perfect next one. Getting Wonder Boy on board for that might be a little more difficult, and that might be the problem that Ian Garry runs into in general now. Like, how many guys that are names are going to be willing to kind of take that step back and fight him at this point, where he has a few notable, Daniel Rodriguez and Magny, but he doesn't really have that win that makes him like a contender yet. So we'll see who he gets next. Obviously, they seem pretty set on Madison Square Garden, or at least Dana and the UFC did. Garry did not seem necessarily thrilled about that idea, but we'll see who kind of wins that battle there, and maybe he'll get 2 or 3 in next year, and we can start talking about him being, a title challenger in 2025.
Yeah, and it doesn't help, just to kind of chime in on like the future matchmaking, that, assume he's like 10 now. 4 guys ranked above him in the division, and Vicente Luque, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Gilbert Burns, who was in his corner, and Kamaru Usman all train with him at Killcliff. And he seemed like open, Usman's name gets mentioned. That would be a great fight. Me and Shavkat, we trained together. It's crazy. That would be a fight. So he's not being like, I won't fight any of these guys, but I think ideal scenario, they're going to try to avoid it as much as possible, unless it's either a championship fight or like a guaranteed title shot on the line. So that definitely makes things a bit trickier in terms of like, who are you going to put him against? There's a few names out there, but it's not as simple as it may look.
Damn, that's some killers over there at 170. All right.
Yeah, geez, right?
Yeah. Hey, Nolan, real quick, man, if you can do it like in less than 60 seconds, just this whole thing with the child abuse. You were there all week. Did he take it too far? Was it out of context in your eyes? Because, man, he kind of, anybody that's just kind of tuning in either to this or the other day would almost think like, what did Neil Magny say? Can you clarify, I guess, for our audience at least?
Yeah, it was, it was interesting on media day, because I heard what Magny said, but I mean, we've heard fighters a ton say like things about like father, kind of having like a dad beat down on somebody. That's not like necessarily, a totally thing that I haven't heard, but I guess that first part was really what Garry took exception with, which was something along the lines of, and I'm not trying to use this as a direct quote, but, now that I'm a father, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, to me, so when we got to the press conference that day, I'd seen Gary's tweet. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Headphone died. I'd seen Gary's tweet, and then at the press conference, when they started going back and forth, I guess I didn't see the video. Like I didn't necessarily know that was all going on. So we didn't really get to hear Neil try to explain. He was trying to explain himself out of it at the press conference. Like he was saying, no. And then Garry was just talking over him and saying he shouldn't have questions and blah, blah, blah. So I think it was a good move on Gary's part. Again, getting attention to him. Regardless, controversy is going to create eyeballs on it. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly for a guy like Neil Magny, who's been very inoffensive throughout his career. Now he's going to have people that always are going to use this against him. This is always going to be a meme or a joke or people criticizing him. Any of the stuff we see from MMA fans when something outside the norm comes about. So I don't know. We'll see. But Garry certainly knows how to get inside his opponent's head. We saw it with Jeff Neal in the lead up to this fight that didn't happen. And then obviously we saw it with Neal.
As someone who got his ass whooped when he was younger, man, I can tell you it works. But I just feel like this whole label of throwing that on the guy, especially post-fight, I was like, wow, enough already. I thought it was maybe just needling at something he said pre-fight, but then he just kept going with it. And, like, I don't know, these people were texting me and telling me, dude, what's with this Magny guy and his kids? And I was like, oh, my gosh.
It felt like, I mean, I don't think anyone is accusing Neil Magny of being the most like eloquent speaker and stuff like that. Like he obviously knows what he's doing. He's being fought in the UFC 31 times. He's done a lot of media day stuff, but it felt more like a metaphor on his side, like I'm going to, beat up, like maybe not the best thing to do, especially in this kind of world and this climate we use where people are seemingly oversensitive to a lot of things. But I don't know, like I've met Neil Magny many times, interviewed him, talked to him on the record, off the record. He seems like a nice guy, an upstanding person. Of course, there's sides to these fighters that we've seen many, many times over the years that are different in private than they are in public. But I would like to believe that Neil Magny is not that type of person. And he was just trying to use a metaphor that came across poorly. And then, Ian Garry stuck a knife into and dragged
Big
through the whole fight and to the post-fight press conference. So is what it is, but I'm sure Neil Magny will be asked about it whenever he is booked for his next fight or has the chance to speak out or does an Instagram post, whatever he wants to do to clarify.
And I believe when Neil Magny was talking at the press conference before he got just totally steamrolled by Ian Garry, just kind of talking over him, I think he was starting to say I've never, and then it just like kind of got blown over. So we'll hear what he says. This is the problem with MMA trash talk sometimes and trying to suck guys into things that they're not used to doing. We've seen some cringy moments in press conferences in the past where you think like two guys just feel like they have to trash talk and something just awful comes out. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. And obviously, again, got a lot of attention this week.
Yeah, it sure did. All right, in the chat, Paul M says Conor McGregor versus Ian McGarry will happen. Man, that's kind of crazy to think because McGregor's been very supportive of Ian Garry, but have I ever seen U-turns in this sport, 180s in this sport?
Croke Park, baby.
Yeah, it's not the craziest thing I ever heard, but I don't think so on this one. Alan says Wallah will be next. Alex E says give Garry a grappler. Alex E repeats Garry versus Brady. All right, good stuff coming in from the chat room. Also, since I got your attention, chat, do me a favor, hit the like and subscribe. Helps the algorithm, helps this thing blow up. We're here every week. You can count on us every week for at least 60 minutes, giving you the goods here, all the top stories, and we try to get to as many questions as we can. It's so easy. Like, subscribe, and then that little bell, it'll tell you when we're on live. This channel is popping. Lots of great stuff. In fact, after us on a separate stream, it's the DWCS weigh-ins Dana White Contender Series every Monday for the next 8 weeks or so. That'll be live as well right after us. So let's keep going here. All right, so coming back to Aljamain Sterling, who many regarded as the GOAT at bantamweight, he appears to be at a crossroads. Never a darling to the UFC execs, I should say. He has a teammate that's ready to make this move at 135 in Dvalishvili, Murad Dvalishvili. He stated at one time that the weight cuts are brutal, and he was honest in his assessment versus Volkanovski. Heck, if this guy can put me down, what would Volk do, right? But you got to believe his emotions are running high. He's no longer the top dog, and he just had his bell rung, right? What really makes the most for him if you're advising him? So now you guys are kind of his advisors, mentors, managers, whatever. Mike, what would you tell him?
This is actually a really tough one. I was kind of thinking about it yesterday when I wrote my post-fight column on basically this exact question. And there's nothing absolutely clear, right? Like I can say with quite confidence, he is not getting an immediate rematch. As you said there, he's not being like a darling champion for the UFC, even though at the end of the day, he has stepped up and taken the fights they wanted him to take, taken the tough fights, all that stuff. He's just a guy that for whatever reason, they haven't been keen to get behind, maybe stood up for himself a little more publicly with certain issues and things like that that could rub them the wrong way. He certainly hasn't been like a UFC yes man, but I think he understood and appreciated his position. You heard about the post-fight press conference being like, I know the UFC gets a lot of crap from fighters and fans, but like they've made my entire life. And I think a lot of fighters feel that same way, whether you want to spin it negatively and being like, well, you have a lot of money in the bank, but if you got your just due, there would probably be 5 or 10 times more in there. But at the end of the day, Aljamain Sterling is appreciative for what he's got from the UFC. I just don't think he's going to get a bone throw his way here. He clearly knows that if you kind of read between the lines of things he was saying. So that makes it real tricky as far as what he should do next. I do think if he had won here and moved to 45, they would have given him that immediate title shot. But here now, that is obviously not going to happen. They're not going to let him move up a division and give him a title fight. So if he wants to go up, he's going to have to fight one of those guys in the top 5. I saw people mention, Brian Ortega, Arnold Allen. Some of these guys would make for intriguing matchups, and then he could make a case for a title shot up there. That feels like maybe the smoother path or just the fresher feeling. It's a new coat of paint because he goes on there and like he sticks at 35. Who do you have him fight? Do you do like, a Corey Sandhagen rematch, whoever is left out of the title picture? He's obviously not going to fight Merab. And then what if he wins again and say in that time Merab becomes the champion, or he's right there for a title fight? Is he going to step on Merab's toes again and kind of complicate their situation? So I don't know. It just feels like a lot of stuff to weave through if you're staying at 35 and saying, I want to get to a Sean O'Malley rematch, I want to be the champion. It makes it real difficult for him. So I guess if I had to pick, 45 would be the right move for him, just because it feels like it's something new and probably an easier path for him going forward. Because I don't see that Sean O'Malley rematch coming anytime soon. And then if Merab beats him, he's completely boxed out.
Yeah, and I love the Ortega matchup, man. Those two on the ground would be fun. All right, how about you, Nolan? What do you like for Aljo next?
It's tough, you know. I think that there's obviously the temptation to go back to 135 or stay at 135, I should say, because of the sour taste that's in his mouth. But just listening to Mike just speak right now about the Merab situation. I mean, the math is so confusing there, right? Like, it made sense when Aljo was the champion for him to kind of be able to play his cards however they want. But now they're essentially equals. I mean, him and Merab are not, you know, they're title, future title challengers or challengers again. They're kind of just sitting in limbo. They probably aren't even the front runner to get the next shot. So I wonder if a move up to 145 does make sense. I'm not saying that I think I kind of have a feeling that Aljo will remain at 135, but I wonder if, you know, just the fact that he's thinking before this fight that he would perform better, his body would feel better at 145 might be the play. And sure, you know, he made a really good point too, counterpoint at the press conference saying, you know, if this happened to me here, think about what Alexander Volkanovski would do to me at 145. So that doesn't sound necessarily the most confident either. Maybe there's a way they can mix and match. The UFC can kind of figure this whole thing out. It is problematic that kind of you know, you got Chito, who's probably going to get it next. And then you've got Merab and Sterling, who are kind of 2 and 3 in that world, not able to fight each other. And you got Sandhagen out. So it's a problem, I think, that everybody involved is going to have to figure out. My understanding is I think Aljamain is on better terms with the UFC for the last couple months, at least since like the Cejudo fight got booked. You know, I think they made it worth his while to take this fight, quick turnaround. You know, that's why you didn't really necessarily hear much from him after it was official. So I think they're on good terms. I think they'll figure something out. But it's a tough, confusing problem for a lot of these guys at the top 135 right now. And I think particularly for Aljo, this is certainly the most complicated of them all.
And they bought him a Lambo too, so maybe he is in the outs like we think he is. Goes, how about you, man? Which direction are you pointing Aljo in?
Man, it was such a tough situation at the end of the fight because mic time is so important, right? What you say on that mic, but at the same time, you just got KO'd. You know, it's hard to put all your thoughts together at that moment. But I thought Sean O'Malley actually did him a pretty big favor in the sense that he called him the GOAT going into this fight. And I think you play off of those words and you say something along the lines of, well, if I'm the GOAT and I just lost, I mean, wouldn't the GOAT deserve an immediate rematch? Regardless of what your status is with Dvalishvili at the moment, I think you just kind of deal with that when you get to the back. But I think you at least kind of throw that out there and let that be known, right? Because if you don't say anything, the UFC will just move on. So but that's also very tough to do in that moment, right? You know, after what just happened. But going forward, I mean, you know, Aljamain Sterling's talked about these weight cuts and what they do to him. But at the same time, he's thrown out what would happen if he faced Volkanovski, right? So, and let's not kind of get it twisted. Volkanovski's not the only 145er. Like, there are good fighters there. The problem is they just keep running into that monster who is Alexander Volkanovski. Doesn't mean they're not good fighters below him, right? So I think that might be tough for Aljamain Sterling. Honestly, if he could just get back in there and win this title again, he could really cement something pretty important at 135. We all talk, you know, some people have been saying he's the GOAT already. Some people feel maybe he's not there just yet, but I think he could have a future there. So it depends on what these weight cuts are really like for him. If they're very difficult, well, hell, fighters go through a lot of difficult things, right? But if you feel like you're just destroying your body, then we understand that you got to move up. There's a lot of questions that Aljamain Sterling needs to answer himself, with him, with his team, and see what he does moving forward. But I would like to see him fight Sean O'Malley again. come on, like Sean O'Malley got the victory. Nobody's disputing that. But I think we can all agree that fight would probably look a little different the second time around. I'm not saying Aljamain Sterling would win. I'm just saying I think more of a fight would play out. I think he could probably go back and watch that tape and analyze that and see some things that he could do a lot better.
For sure. 6 minutes is a long time for Aljo not to really be wrestling. I mean, I know there was one attempt, but come on, there should have been a lot more. We keep, forgetting Henry Cejudo. We keep talking about Dvalishvili and Sandhagen. Cejudo's also a name. By the way, Mulatto Vanguard says there's no way in hell Sterling's even considered a GOAT. GOAT label's being thrown around too loosely. I mean, John Anik thought he was. Sean O'Malley thought he was. I don't think it was the craziest thing ever. I think I still hold on to Dominic Cruz with his 5 title defenses, 2 in the WEC, 3 in the UFC. As the GOAT, but I mean, he was knocking on that door. So to say no way in hell, that's like saying some scrubs, some tomato can is the name that we're tossing out. And Sterling's had a proper resume, so I would disagree with you, Mulatu Vanguard. Gabe Killian Entertainment says Dana said Aljo will get an immediate rematch. Most pay-per-view buys in bantamweight history. I did not hear that an immediate rematch. If anything, definitely I said, he played his greatest hits. One of his greatest hits is I don't make fights on fight night. But I don't think I heard that one, Gabe Killian. Good to see you. All right, let's move on here. We can always circle back with any additional questions that we have. So the Dana White Contender Series has now produced 2 champions in Jamal Hill and Sean O'Malley. Who did it best, and who do you see having a better overall career? Guys, consider the athletic performance and then obviously the superstardom, whatever your criteria is here to answering the question. Who do you think might be the next alumni also to join this club? Nolan, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the fact that Sean O'Malley won at bantamweight in a very tough time at bantamweight, I have to give him the edge for this. And that's no slight to Jamal Hill. I mean, it's impressive that both guys were able to come off the show and kind of we saw their build. Their build was highlighted more than maybe some of the other prospects. So good job with the UFC by building both those guys. But O'Malley, I think winning against a guy like Sterling in a time in this division is certainly more impressive out of the 2. As for who's next, I mean, we'll see. There's a lot of, solid names coming off the Contender Series. It's really kind of funny to look back and think that, there's been 7 seasons and a Brazil season. I feel like this, to me at least, it doesn't seem like that this show has been around that long. So it's obviously been a great feeder to the UFC. I know some people like it, some people don't. Some people, kind of see it as the UFC just being able to control things more. But I think it's the one thing that it has done that's been good from a fan perspective is it's given these guys kind of some notoriety before they even go in the UFC. Like their debuts, some of them feel like kind of big, right? Whereas normally there'd be a lot of people that just tune in and say, oh, some 2 new guys are fighting. Now it's like, oh, that's the guy that got the spin kick, or that's Bo Nickel, or that's, Raul Rosas. That's, so the show's done great. And I think it's maybe put a little bit more pressure on the UFC to try to build some of these guys that are coming off the show hot. We even see in the War Room when Dana White does his, if you don't know, now you know, like they specifically have on these guys' cards who's been on Contenders, where, which guys came from Contender Series and which guys came from the Ultimate Fighter. So we'll see who's next. There's a big cream of the crop right now. And, who knows, there's maybe a future champion in this season as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, Goes, your thoughts here. Who do you think did it best, man? Let's not forget Jamal Hill. He also took out a former champion. He didn't get the incumbent, but Glover Teixeira. And then that run he had of Crute, Walker, and Thiago Santos. He was sniping fools too.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. If you look at Sean O'Malley's rise, I'm not sure that he was the favorite in any of these fights, right? Like people were hating on him, doubting him at every turn, and then he would just shock the world over and over and over. With Jamal Hill, I feel like his run was a little different. I don't know that people really doubted him. I think we all felt like he was on his way. If not this fight, the next fight. His win, it impressed us. It confirmed what a lot of us thought of him, as where Sean O'Malley just kind of shocked us along the way over and over. Not to mention going through probably a guy that a lot of people are saying could be the bantamweight GOAT, as where if you look at Jamal Hill, he was going through more of an aging guy, right? A guy more on his decline. That being said, though, maybe Sean O'Malley's rise was a little bit more entertaining and shocking, but I feel like Jamal Hill might have the longer run. I think I think the way the division is stacked up and the way he improves, hopefully he gets over this injury. Okay. I think he'll probably be around a little bit longer. If you're going to ask me who the next guy is, man, that's difficult. But I'd say a guy to maybe keep your eye on is Jailton Almeida. I think is pretty tough.
All right, Mike, what say you?
Yeah, I think Sean O'Malley's rise was the more prominent of the two. Jamal Hill's title win was more a situation of circumstance, right? Like we had the draw in that vacant title fight, and then they pushed it back a month later because they needed something for Brazil. His was a lot of circumstantial. He probably would have had another win or two needed in order to get a title shot if it wasn't for that. And Sean O'Malley's path was, much more clear, whether you feel he was given favorable matchups or whatever the case may be. I think his was more impressive to me, and I think he has the brighter future at this point. I mean, according to him, he's running the shit till 2035, baby. So we'll see what happens. But and then Jamal Hill is literally dealing with one of the most devastating injuries an athlete can right now with the torn Achilles. So it's hard for me to be super positive about his future right now, although we obviously hope he gets healthy and is, back to his peak form whenever he does get back in there. So yeah, it's O'Malley to me as far as what comes next. Jailton Almeida is a good shout. He is the most high-ranked guy who feels within proximity of that. Bo Nickel is obviously a clear name you have to mention, but outside of that, it doesn't feel like there's someone right on the doorstep of that. These two guys to get it done within the same calendar year, obviously great for the show, but I don't think we're going to be having another Dana White Contender Series champ in the next 6 months here. It's probably going to be a longer wait to see how things play out here.
I know it's a long shot, but I'm going to toss Grant Dawson's name into the ring as well, because he just has a little bit of kind of like what the Dagestanis are doing, very suffocating ground game. And he racks up, 10 9s, 10 8s. So we'll see. He's got to get there first, though. It's killer after killer, just like Bantamweight is. All right, guys. Might only have time for one additional here. Are you guys buying or selling what Colby Covington had to say about John Jones, former college teammate, roommate? He says that they're keeping him off UFC 295 because John Jones says, I don't want this guy on my card. All right, Goes, what are your thoughts here? Quick, please.
Good. I mean, I don't think it's the most shocking thing, right? It's difficult. Like, John Jones has put us in a situation where it's hard to really trust him. So these comments, I mean, when Colby Covington comes out and might be the voice of reason, we got to kind of check what's going on outside, right? But I don't know. I mean, there could be something to it, but unless we really hear it from anyone, it's just hearsay.
All right, Mike, you buying or selling what Colby Covington had to say?
I'm buying it, even though you have to take anything that comes out of Colby Covington's mouth with a grain of salt. We know John Jones is trying to, he's very conscious of his public image. And the last thing he wants is a guy who knows a lot of things about him from when he was at a younger age, college roommates and stuff, that he is not going to have the single bit of hesitation to not only reveal, but probably embellish even more, sitting up there at his press conference with his family and all that stuff in the world watching. I don't think John Jones wants that. And if he can avoid it, he's going to. And if he wants to tell the UFC, I don't want this on my card in New York, potential retirement fight, all this stuff, I think he's got enough pull that they'll probably be willing to oblige to that. So the idea of it was funny. Those two sitting up there, all the things Colby would say. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all if Jones actually said this.
All right, Nolan, is it unanimous? Buying, selling?
I don't know. I mean, it's so believable and unbelievable at the same time, because it sounds like something that's true, but it's also coming from somebody who doesn't say many true things. So I don't know.
All right, last one real quick. Mike, I'm just going to go to you on this one. Max Holloway, Korean Zombie, headline Saturday's UFC Fight Night. 8-1 favorite. Was the UFC out of line here to make this matchup just to fill the schedule? Yes or no? 30 seconds.
I want to say a little bit yes, just because it seems like such a mismatch, but I guess I get it. There's not many clear options for Max Holloway to fight. Both these guys have said they wanted to fight each other for a long time. It's being discussed and nearly booked in the past. I get it, especially if it was Korean Zombie's retirement fight wish. Sure. It's just I feel like this is going to play out in kind of a sad fashion. Max Holloway is a rightfully gigantic favorite. So I just hope he doesn't put too bad of a licking on the Korean Zombie here.
Yeah, but we'll definitely be tuning in. And of course, MMA Junkie always covering all the big fights here. We got a PFL playoff matchup, playoff fight card coming up this week as well. Look out for that. Dana White Contender Series, everything. In fact, the weigh-ins are about to start on another stream, so go over there. But
Sounds
do me
like
a favor, hit the
sounds like there's
and
going to be some drama too off the bat. So tune
there
in.
you go. Hit the like and subscribe here. Move over to the other screen and stream and hit the like and subscribe there. You guys will be doing us a solid, and we will see you all next week here on Spinning Back Clique. Take care.